Hello, Joanne. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to talk with you and just shed some light on what can happen when you build space in your community for good things to happen. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we're going to start first with your background and the work that you did that led you to the work you're doing now. Because when you explain your career, it first would be like, well, how does that connect? But you make it connect, and I think you can describe it better than I can.
Sure. I spent 10 years, about 17 years in hospitality, but 10 years of that 17 was mainly in hotels. So anywhere between like a city hotel to a resort and all that. So just a variety of different cities here in the Bay Area. But my job was mainly sales and marketing and revenue generating departments that would focus on making sure that the hotel space is profitable. And a lot of that, as opposed to people thinking that people just rent out the rooms and then they rent out the meeting space, there's so much work that comes into designing these spaces to make sure that, whatever hotel that I work for, it will be the first in mind of people. And then fast forward, right before the pandemic for about almost 7 years, I was overseeing parks, building different recreation and activities in different regional, state, and national parks across 5 states. So that was a lot of fun, anywhere between creating glamping units to yeah. And just making sure that it stays relevant and exciting for the different generations that are visiting our parks now, all the way to creating outdoor schools and creating cafes and all those good stuff, e-bikes and trams and whatnot.
One of my dear friends has been an interior designer. That's what she went to school for years. And now
Mhm.
she's a project manager for events planner manager for a big, like one of the swankiest hotels in Houston.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you bring that up because um, I she might feel like, and I'm going to tell her this because I think sometimes she feels like she's not doing the things she used to do. But now I'm thinking her eye goes into every detail, and
Mhm.
that is something, to be excited about or maybe look at it that way, right? Because of the details that happen in a room, the vibe it gives or whatever it is to make sure that that event and that space fits what the client wants.
Right, exactly. One of my favorite authors is Don Norman of emotional design. He wrote the book Emotional Design. It really talks about how different textures and color and just details in the space communicates to the person receiving that space, or that person who is in that space.
Mhm.
Certain colors and brands really triggers a part of our brain and tells us how to act and how to react. And so I carry that with me in all the spaces that I've helped build and design. And, there's really an art, there's so much that you could learn in using art to generate revenue. I think when people talk about art, they simply think, oh, it's a painting or it's the color palette, but there's so much to it that people can really, lose themselves just exploring the different facets of how to use art in their own businesses.
When you talk about the spaces, the parks, and excuse me, making sure that it's appealing as the generations change, and you did it for several years, but it makes me curious how much it's changed. I have a friend, my parents' friends who are in their 70s, and they've told me this story about this van that they drove across the country. And it was before van life was a thing. It was
Yeah.
actually a school bus that they'd converted before that was a thing. And it was
Yeah.
lavender or purple and all the places that they went. And it would just seem like a simpler time. But when I
Right.
think about glamping, I mean, my girlfriends and I have gone and done some of that. And it's just,
Mhm.
coming into a space where you would never think like a tent would have these lights and these, throw pillows and things like that that kind of seem probably really ridiculous to my parents who took us camping
Mhm.
in McLeod when my dad had softball tournaments in California, which
Right.
just a tent, a sleeping bag, and nothing fancy. So there's
Right.
all different ways to do it, but to get to create space to make it, appealing to that demographic, that's
Right.
probably a good time too.
Yes. it's definitely new. When I was first started building it, a lot of people who has been in the industry were like, what are we doing here? We're
Yeah,
bringing
they
the
know the
mattress
story.
out.
Yeah, yeah.
Why do we need linen? So it was definitely new to a lot of folks. But then because it's so new, because it's exciting, because it's intriguing, I think that's exactly what propelled a lot of these folks to try it out. And, fast forward now to 2025, you'll see how much bigger it's gotten and
Mhm.
how visible it is now in different areas.
Yeah.
Um, but, as with most things, you have to constantly change and update and try new things to make sure that people are interested and people are present in your space. But like, to your point before, everyone knows how to pitch a tent.
Some
They
better than
have
others. Yeah.
and they would have their own camping gears and all that.
Mhm.
But now, the way that people live has changed. A lot of folks don't have the space
Mhm.
to store a lot of these equipment.
Mhm.
Um, and so hence why it's so much more convenient to have rentals at these parks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds
Typically.
like fun either way. So now let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the transition you've made into spaces near you that have created the same kind of experience that maybe people wouldn't get otherwise. So we'll be back in just a moment. Joanne, we've been talking about your experience in creating space and please doing it in a way that people want to visit and maybe have a new experience than they would have had before, whether it's in a park or a hotel. And so you created something called Good Morning Maxwell.
Mhm.
And tell us a little bit about what that is, and then we'll get into a deeper dive of the actual locations and what goes into each of those spaces, where you are in the Bay Area. And I share it with you, the audience, even though we're not in the Bay Area, obviously, it definitely gets us thinking about our local community.
Right, absolutely. So I opened Good Morning Maxwell in 2020,
Name for your
February,
son?
named
Yeah.
after my son,
Uh-huh.
Maxwell, Liam Maxwell. But I opened it in February 27th, on February 27, 2020, 2 weeks before the pandemic.
Yes.
So the most exciting time, I have to say. I don't know about perfect, but perfect in the sense of that we definitely had everyone's ears and eyes looking to see how we were going to navigate and pivot during that crazy year of the pandemic. But I had opened it in hopes that I would be able to have something that's more local, that's more closer to my house that I could do for a living and focus on really doing what I've already been doing the last 17 years for all these big spaces, but doing it for my own community.
So you
And,
created a space. You did you buy the space? Did you lease the space?
I leased
You
the very
renovate
first,
it?
yes, I renovated and leased my very, very first space, which is not this one that I'm in right now. It was really tiny. It was less than 900 square feet. And the idea really was just for me to be able to teach a lot of womenpreneur, specifically, to be more specific, like moms who are baking, creating, crocheting, macrame, candle making, all those fun craft
Mhm.
business to teach them how to make sure that they know their branding, their positioning, that it's profitable, and that at the end of the day, when they're all tired and exhausted from doing things that they are passionate about, that they are able to bring some dollars home.
Yeah.
And so that was the main goal, really. A lot of us, we get lost in creating things that we are passionate with and, looking at what it really brings, for our bottom line is
Yeah.
the last thing that we want
Yeah.
to look at.
I know of some folks who, I years ago created a pillow business, Alphabet Pillows, and I knew exactly, like, down to the dollar, to the stuffing, to the beads, to the thread, everything, what it costs to make each pillow.
Right.
And that came from not doing it in the beginning and just
Right.
kind of figuring out, what do I charge for these? And then also paying the seamstresses and knowing what was fair for them. And then I work with people in business, men and women, who had no clue.
Right.
at all for years in business selling something, and they might not have been profitable at all. They aren't even paying themselves sometimes,
Right.
and that's
Exactly.
understandable at the beginning. But at some
Right.
point, you got to figure out how to get paid.
Correct, exactly. Well, for any business, whether small, medium, or large, right? For it to be
Mhm.
sustainable, you really gotta make sure that you know what the bottom line brings you, what's your cost of goods. It's good to be fueled with so much inspiration and talent, but at the end of the day, it needs to make sense.
Yeah.
And so I always explained it to people that I'm here to help other small business owners to look at the unsexy part of the job.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you create this one space, you renovate it, you get it ready to open, and then the pandemic shuts everything down. So you said eyes were on you to see how you'd pivot. How did you pivot?
I ended up doing a tiny, tiny, tiny makers market with only 7 vendors. And so it was a sourdough business called Mushroom Mama, and then I had a macrame business, and then the plant business owner. So it was 7 different folks, all within the craft industry, and then we did it in our breezeway. And lo and behold, the first outdoor market, because it had to be outdoors with mask, and we
Mhm.
could only allow at that time, I think about 8 people at a time in
Okay.
our breezeway. And we ended up with over 150 people lined up. So it grew from 7 vendors to 40.
Wow.
And so, it
And
came to
how
a
often
point,
did you have these events? Excuse me.
I want to say we had it minimum about twice a month.
Okay, so you grew
So
from over pretty, you had them pretty often and grew over time. Okay.
right. So what happened was that I started small in my space, and then I moved to a bigger space, which is where we're at right now. And I had a big parking lot. So we're able to accommodate a lot more vendors. But then a lot of the wineries at that time could not open and operate as a tasting room. And so they needed to figure out how to bring in foot traffic into their wineries. And so they started calling me asking if I could bring the markets, which was really exciting for me because my whole premise of building the space is to help small business owners who did not have a brick and mortar. And so I have a huge roster of about huge in my perspective, a little over 250 of
Sure.
all these different makers around the Tri Valley who just wanted a platform. They needed a physical platform to be able to sell their products. Um, so yeah.
So you had the one space, and then how did it grow, or when did it grow to all the spaces you have now?
I think after 2 months of doing it back in 2020, a lot of the wineries started reaching out. We even had a butcher shop that just newly opened at that time, and he had a big parking lot. So the same thing happened, the family owned business, and they were just like, hey, and I was just like, I don't know, Maker's Market in a butcher shop area. But then we had a big smoker,
Mhm.
and um, um, Ultimate Beer Works, which is a big brand here in the Bay. Their local
Yeah.
fantastic family, they came in and showed up, and everyone, they were just so grateful
Yeah.
to have that kind of gathering
Yeah.
during the craziest year.
Well, the one thing too, and you've gone on to succeed to open more areas, more events, and all those things that we'll get to as well. But one of the things that I think about when you said you wanted to create a job that was closer to home, it
Mhm.
wasn't necessarily that you wanted to work from home, obviously, because
No,
you created a physical space you are still going to,
yeah.
and to get to have that connection with community. So I, for example, have
Mhm.
a client who sells a digital product, and she's
Mhm.
struggling with it on social media. She has thousands of followers, but still struggling with sales. And she has a business that she used to do in person.
Mhm.
And I said, why don't you have an in-person event where
Mhm.
you're showcasing your product, which is
Right.
digital, but it
Mhm.
can still be done in person, and then
Right.
hire someone to film you so that you're getting that content for social
Right.
media, because she's also
Right.
burnt out on
Two
creating
birds in one
content.
stone. Yeah.
And so then you get to have that in person, and hire a teenager, because they know what to do with their phones. You don't have to hire an expensive
Right.
videographer or anything,
Mhm.
and just get back in your community.
Mhm. Mhm.
If producing content is stealing your joy, on social media, find another way. We forget sometimes as business owners, particularly people who start out in a product-based business or a
Mhm.
service in-person based business,
Mhm.
that we can still do that in person.
Right.
And
Right. And
it doesn't matter whether you're online or in person, you can choose. And if one space isn't feeling right for you anymore, or you want to do both, you can.
I 100% agree. I think, one of the biggest questions that I got as an expert in this industry, right, in the events, everyone wanted to know what happens post pandemic. That was the number one question that I was getting from everyone because we, from the birthday parties to the big conferences that we have in major cities, everyone was switching to virtual, right?
Mhm.
And so there was a huge question in everyone's mind on how are we going to act and navigate post pandemic, or is this the new norm now? And I was one of the people who constantly said that no, it's not going to be like this forever.
Mhm.
And the hybrid, I really think, is where it would stay.
Yeah.
People realized and recognized the convenience of being able to do a virtual event, but there is no replacement for face to face.
Yeah, there's not.
Also, and I'm sure that you know this as well. The amount of benefits that you get from having people in front of you, anywhere from brand loyalty to authentic connections to the amount of brainstorming and ideas that you'd be able to produce from having people with you physically, it's just incomparable. It's
Yeah.
not the same.
And what about the hybrid approach? Have you ever considered, now live selling is getting to be this big thing. Have you ever considered doing live selling during one of these where it's an online option while also being in person? I was just talking with a client who's doing an
Yeah.
online connection. Yeah. It's an interesting way to
Um,
do business.
it's definitely something that we dabbled on back in 2022,
Mhm.
2021, when we were still figuring out
Yeah.
if we're actually going to go back fully in person or is this here to stay. But um, I don't know. It's definitely a huge business,
Mhm.
right? And if you have the audience and the following, you could make a lot of revenue and it's absolutely sustainable. But as for me, it's probably just not my jam.
Yeah, and it would take away from that connection, it
Right.
would take away because you'd have this spectacle thing happening. But it is a way for people to think about there's just so many ways to sell. There's so many
Right.
ways to sell. And
Right.
your model is working perfectly just as it
Right.
is.
With online selling though, I am one of those women who watches,
Yeah.
these live selling and I
Yeah.
do buy.
Yeah.
I am
It
guilty of it.
works.
And there's a FOMO feeling, right?
Yeah.
Of when they go live and you're busy, but you just have it on playing just so you're sure that you don't miss out on anything
Uh-huh.
perfect for you.
Uh-huh.
Um, but as for me, as for my business model, my spaces are a gathering
Yeah.
space, whether it's a team building or a lunch and learn or
Sure.
a business mixer, bridal showers, celebrations of life. And so I like to focus on encouraging people to come
Yeah. Yeah.
out.
Let's take
But
a break. Oh, wait, go ahead. Let's take
sorry,
one quick
but
break. Oh,
okay,
let's take one quick break and then we'll wrap
yes.
up because we just have
All right,
3 minutes.
sounds
I
good.
want to make sure we get a third segment. All right, just a sec. Okay, sorry about that.
No, 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 no worries. I was just gonna go back to where you mentioned about having the hybrid aspect of it, but
Okay.
it's okay. We don't need to mention.
Okay. Well, let's record 1 minute so we can just fix that part.
Okay.
And we can you can just say what you just said about for MySpace, it's about gathering and then we can go to break.
Sure.
So go ahead and start that.
For MySpace, it really hones in into making sure that people gather in person and find time to connect with each other and just be together, right? But the virtual component, the hybrid component, is definitely something that I still see today all the time in the different meetings that are hosted at the spaces.
Yeah, we have to you have to do what feels right for you and your business model, and yours is obviously, like I said, it's working well. So let's take a quick break and we'll finish up in just a moment. We are wrapping up with you, Joanne, owner of Good Morning Maxwell. You have 4 different locations in the Bay Area. You happen to live in a town that my dad grew up in. And so I'm familiar with it. And just the point to say that this can happen in small towns. You have a number of different small towns, smaller towns, not big cities where your event spaces are. So for people who are watching, how did what is your advice for someone? You went from 7 vendors to now you have up to 250 that you can draw together at any time to create events for or with.
Right. As with most business, right, adventure that people decide to get into, you really have to acknowledge and recognize the purpose of what you're doing this for, because it is very exhausting. I tell people all the time who leaves the corporate world that you're trading your 50, 60-hour work week for your 80-hour work
Yeah, and
week.
it's purpose
Um,
driven, right? Your why
True.
really matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More than anything, right? Because when the excitement when the excitement dwindles down, all you have to hang on to is your purpose as to who you're doing this for and what you're doing this for. So it's really important that you have that. And then the second part of it, side by side with knowing your why, is to just mustering up the courage to jump in with both feet.
Mhm.
Just because you'll never know until you try. And people always talk about starting small and, just gaining your sea legs first and whatnot. I will tell you, it's the same amount of work.
To do it small or go big or go home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And yeah, go big or go home kind of thing, right? But in all seriousness, having an A list of folks who are going to be your ally, who are going to be your supporters, and who will work and walk this journey with you is so crucial, because there's going to be a lot of doubts along the way, and there's going to be a lot of times wherein you're going to question yourself whether you should just go back into finding a day job,
Mhm.
or do you want to keep doing what you're doing right now, something that makes you excited and happy and has so much meaning for you. But if you have those people who are who are walking and working this journey with you, it makes it so much more sustainable.
Yeah. And one of the things too that I think is important to mention is, when we talk about starting small or getting started, I think there's never a perfect time. I mean, you started
Mhm.
yours during the pandemic and
Mhm.
the pivot, we all learned the word pivot, or learned it in the context of a pandemic, but we have different pivots in life. We absolutely have different pivots in life.
Mhm.
And so I think it's important for us to remember that there is no perfect time. We just have to seize the time that we're in and make decisions that align with what feels purposeful for us in our business, in our life, and how that aligns. So I appreciate you being here. Good Morning Maxwell is the name of your business. And if I'm ever in the area, I'd love to see one of your
Me too.
locations and get to visit with you in person, just like you
Yes.
said.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was fantastic. And I hope, the folks listening are able to get a little bit of tidbits of how to start their own spaces.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much, Joanne.
All right. Take care.